All right, good morning, everybody, and thank you for your attending today. And what I hope to do is provide a broad overview of the special education process and kind of try and tie together for you a lot of the information that you heard from Kimberly and Greg already this morning. So let's go ahead and get started here. If I can get my slides to advance. So my name is Frank Podobnik. I'm a technical assistant specialist with TACE, the Center for Technical Assistance for Excellence in Special Education, Utah State. Um, I am the parent of 3 grown children, all of who were served as children with disabilities in the public school system. I'm a school psychologist by training and worked in the public schools in Montana. I've got 27 years of experience in special education, so not quite as much as Greg, but it's been good quality experience. I also, after having worked in the schools, worked for the Montana Office of Public Instruction, the state education agency in Montana, for 18 years. And the last 8 years that I was there, I was the state special education director. So I was Margie's cohort. Brenda has put a couple of documents in the chat for you to please download. One is a copy of this PowerPoint in the slides, so you can follow along or take notes on it if you would like. And another is a document on a primer on acronyms, and Greg was just talking about that. We'll get into that more later on. So as I said, I work for TACE, and this is just a slide that shows some of the activities that we're involved in across the country. We work in about 40 states, and we get to do all different kinds of things, and appreciate the opportunity every time we get a chance to do trainings like these. Like Greg, my wife also worked as a paraprofessional in the schools. I did not, so I don't have that direct experience. My wife was a paraprofessional who worked in a behavioral, social, emotional support program in a middle school. And so I've always admired her for her ability to do that and to be effective at that. So part of my role as a school psychologist, and certainly as a state education agency person, was actually to provide training for teachers and paraprofessionals, paraeducators in our schools in Montana. So just again, a quick overview. The fundamentals of special education, and talk about the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act and the role of the paraeducator and the teachers and everyone in that process. So trying to get you to think about the issues and responsibilities paraeducators have. You've heard already this morning about a lot of those issues. Greg was just talking about this whole communication piece and how important all that is, and we'll go into that also as well. All right. Whoa. Sorry about that. My finger got a little excited on that arrow key. So a little bit about the history of special education. We all talk about the IDEA. As Greg mentioned, we throw around a lot of acronyms in education, and we will, one of the documents that I wanted to share with you is a little booklet that explains a lot of those acronyms. It's something that we share frequently with people when we're doing these kinds of trainings. We share it with parents, with educators, with state education advisor, special education advisory panels, so that, because it's important that we think about how we communicate. But you'll hear a lot of different things. You'll hear people talk about Public Law 94142. You'll hear people talk about the IDEA and all of those things. The idea of special education and services for children with disabilities really goes back to the Elementary and Secondary Education Act in 1965. So special education as a separate requirement under the law came about in 1975 with the passage of the Education of All Handicapped Children Act. And that's that Public Law 94142 that you hear people talk about. So, but in many states, for example, in the state where I work in Montana, special education was actually something the public education agency was doing clear back into the 1950s. It's not something that was invented in 1975. What happened in 1975 was that the Congress encoded it into law as a way of ensuring that children with disabilities could be included in schools. I'm sure you've all seen the movie Forrest Gump, and there's that scene in the movie where, the principal of the school, well, Mrs. Gump, Forrest scores below this line, so he can't attend our school. That's real. That was not something that was made up for that movie. That was something that really happened. Kids were excluded. And so the main purpose of the law in 1975 was to open the door, to bring kids into school. And over time, the law has, of course, changed through actions in the courts, through revisions of the law. And what is where it's at now is that the focus is not just on including kids in school, including them in the general education classroom as much as possible based on their needs, and focusing on results. Are the services that are being provided to children effective at helping them learn? Okay, so the focus is on results. So you can see that, as was mentioned earlier, not only, as Kimberly said, does the role of your paraeducator or teacher or administrator change over time just because of the nature of the situations you're in, the nature of the children that you're working with. It changes because of the changes in the law. And the last revision of the what's now called the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, happened in 2004. The regulations for it were published in 2006. And so it's a law that's supposed to be reauthorized every 5 years. So we're going on 17 years now, and there has not been a reauthorization. But during that time, there have been changes to the regulations. So there have been things that have changed. So it's not a static thing. It's something that continues to evolve. But not one piece, but the core of the law doesn't really change much over time. The special education is a process, and it's something that we often think of special education as that place, or as those things that are separate from the rest of the school or from general education. In fact, we draw a line between general education and special education just by calling them two different things. But in reality, the lines are not so clear. The special education and general education are all about educating children. They're all students in your school. They all belong to everyone in the school. It's a collaborative effort, and at no time do kids simply go from being a general education student to a special education student. And so that's one of the things that we need to really think about. When we were talking about the team building and the work, and how we think about and talk about kids. And we have to remember that they are all our students. They all belong to us. And even in this process of special education, there is a lot of work, and a lot of the roles, or a lot of the work that's done that really is being done outside of what we classically would think of as special education. So if we look at this flow chart here on the screen on the slide, you can see that it outlines the process for how a child comes into being identified as being eligible for special education related services, how the process progresses, and how they eventually exit. Okay. So up here at the top, we begin with this idea of tiered interventions. And you may, in Wyoming, you may refer to this as RTI. You may refer to it as multi-tiered systems of supports. You may hear it referred to as a teacher assistance team process. But the important part of this is that before a child is considered to be a child with a disability, there has to be evidence that they have a disability and that they need specialized education. And so it's important that we try things, we make interventions, we try things to address the needs of the child prior to this beginning this evaluation process to determine if they're a child with a disability. So the pre-referral phase, and again, talking here about paraeducators, oftentimes paraeducators in the audience who are Title I paraeducators or general education paraeducators more often, but sometimes even paraeducators who are mainly working in special education get involved in this intervention process. As Kimberly talked about earlier, part of the role is that providing support for educators in the classroom and for students in the classroom. And so at this beginning level, you may find yourself doing work on helping implement an intervention with a child. So if a child needs additional support in reading, they receive their reading instruction from the classroom teacher. And then you may have a role in providing additional practice or additional supports to the student to help determine if that is going to be enough. The purpose of this process is that we don't want to identify children as eligible for special education or as a child with a disability if they don't really have one. And so the law requires and the regulations require that we work with the kids, that we make sure that we are doing everything we can to make sure that they cannot learn in the regular education environment without the necessary specialized instruction and specialized supports that they would get from special education. Because there's a recognition that it is for a child who doesn't need those types of services, it can be detrimental. And so I'm seeing the comments and, Simone is saying it's sad that sometimes we as parents identify a student we mention to teachers, and unfortunately the process to get them under an IEP is pretty long. And that absolutely can be true, and it depends on the circumstances and how good we are at what Greg was just talking about, that collaboration and communication and people playing their part and doing their roles, right? So again, the other piece of this, and this is sort of what you're getting at here with Mary documenting our experience, one piece of this is that this process in learning or looking at a child and evaluating them has to be a data-driven process. And what I mean by that is that it can't be that, well, I feel like this kid doesn't learn. There has to be evidence, there has to be test results, there has to be observations, there has to be classroom behavior data, different kinds of things. And so as paraeducators, you'll often find yourself in that role of collecting that sort of data. Now, if you do find yourself in that role, there should be training for you about how to do that. Sometimes it's pretty simple. You count how many times a specific behavior occurs in a certain period of times, but sometimes it's more complex. Sometimes you're doing repeated readings with the student and you're collecting data on how many errors they make, and you need to be taught how to prompt them or how to record those errors. It's important that there's consistent data, and that again, it's data that everyone will understand. So that pre-referral work is really critical. Once the team of professionals, which includes the paraprofessionals, has looked at this data and determined that they believe that their child may have a disability, there's a referral made. It's in the regulations and the law referred to as the initial request for a comprehensive evaluation, but we frequently refer to it just as a referral. And so part of this process is reviewing the existing data that exists, reviewing the existing data regarding the child to help formulate a plan for how the evaluation needs to proceed. Do we need to do an evaluation? Is there evidence that suggests that there is in fact a disability? What sort of evaluation instruments do we need to look at? Do we need to have intelligence testing? Do we need to have behavioral assessment, whatever? That comes from looking at that data that's collected during that intervention phase. And so it's important that they're, from the very beginning, that we're doing a good, solid job of collecting data, and that we're making sure that we're communicating that clearly with everyone on the team. So once the comprehensive evaluation is completed, there's a meeting to make an eligibility determination for the child. And under the IDEA, there are 13 disability categories that the child can qualify under, and they may meet the criteria in one or more of those categories. And you're familiar with those. Those are speech language impaired, learning, specific learning disabilities, significant emotional disturbance, right? Other health impairments. Those are all the categories, and the child may meet the criteria for more than one of them. But the identification of a child with a disability is a two-part process. One, they have to meet those criteria, and the second is that they have to show a need for specialized instruction. So because of that disability, the child demonstrates a need. And that need, again, is established through those pre-referral interventions. The data from the pre-referral interventions is what shows that, in fact, the child cannot perform in the regular classroom with supports. And that's what determines their need for specialized instruction. So a child, and this is sometimes hard for folks to understand, that you may have a child who in fact meets all the criteria to be identified as a child with a specific learning disability, but because of their ability to perform, they don't qualify for special education. They don't qualify for specialized instruction because they can learn without specialized instruction. They can learn with modifications and accommodations in the regular classroom. The need for accommodations and modifications is not a need for special education. That, in fact, is a need that would make them eligible under Section 504. And Section 504 is Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1975. It's a specific section in the law that talks about disabilities and the need for services. And it includes education as an area of a basic life function that needs support. And so I've seen you in the comments throughout the day mentioning IEPs and 504, so most of you are aware of those differences, but a child can qualify for supports and modifications and accommodations under Section 504 of the Rehab Act. It's not special education, but they can receive some support and some services there. So that's the eligibility determination. Now, just because they are not eligible under IDEA does not mean they're automatically eligible under Section 504. So there's another process that has to happen there. But throughout this process, again, the information, the requirement of the law is that when we're conducting an evaluation, that the team is examining data from multiple sources. And one of those sources should be the people that are working with the child, which includes the classroom teacher and paraeducators if they're working with the child. So there should be some way within your system, not necessarily that you're attending all of these meetings, but that there's some way that you're able to communicate with your teacher, with the teacher that you support, and that they then can carry that information to the team. Because it's a really critical piece. And a lot of times, in my experience, I will tell you, when we have had a situation where we have identified a child, especially around behavioral things, and we've developed an IEP and we've implemented some things, and they don't work well, oftentimes it's because we didn't have a piece of information from a paraeducator who was working directly with the child. So there's something that they were observing, or something that the child had shared with them that they hadn't shared with anybody else. You work with these children every day very closely, doing reading, you get very connected to them. They may open up and share things with you that they don't share with others. So it's important that we get all that piece of information in order to develop a plan. So Brenda just posted and this is what something I'd like either Dina or others of you to respond to. What is state requirements for intervention before a student can be tested for special ed services? My district says 6 weeks of interventions, then the BIT process will start. So what is your state standard?
Margie, do you want to take that one?
I have a generic answer I can give, because there's an issue here that you need to be careful about.
Frank, I'm not sure if Margie's having some technical problems,
okay,
but if you want to take that, and then I will follow up if she's not on. Thanks.
So here's what I would say. It's not, in my opinion, appropriate to establish a standard of how long an intervention has to be given. What needs to be the standard is that an intervention is applied until the team has enough evidence to say, is it being effective or is it not? And you can't do an intervention twice and the child refuse to do it and say that it's not effective. What I'm talking about is that you have collected enough data over time to be able to graph that data and look at it and look at the trend. Is the data improving, or is the data staying static? Is the child's performance getting worse? Sometimes an intervention can actually make things worse. So you need to be aware of that and be paying attention to that. So you need to have multiple data points, and however long it takes to collect that. If you're doing a daily behavior monitoring, and you're monitoring the occurrences of a behavior on a daily basis, over a period of a couple of weeks, you could collect enough data to have a sense of if an intervention was working or not. If you're looking at reading and you're using chapter tests as a measure, then it's going to take you much longer, because you're moving through the chapters at whatever pace, and you're going to have those things. If you're using dibbles and it's a weekly probe, so it's hard to say it has to be 6 weeks, because it may take longer, it may not take that long. One of the reasons that I tell you to be cautious about that is because the courts, in cases where complaints have been filed, are looking at those kinds of things, districts having a strict, you have to go this long standard, as a unnecessary delay. So if you had data within 2 weeks to show that the intervention wasn't being effective, but the child was forced to stay in that intervention for 4 more weeks, that's unnecessary delay. So that's what I would say is districts, you need to, you need to be looking at the data that you're collecting and let the data drive the decision making. Whether or not an intervention is working is based on the data on how effectively was it implemented. Was it implemented with fidelity? Meaning, was it implemented the way it was designed to be? So if you're implementing a reading curriculum, if you're implementing the reading curriculum in a way that it wasn't designed to be implemented, then and it doesn't work, then that's not evidence that the intervention was bad. That's evidence that the delivery of it was. So, you know, the question came up, what if the parent requests? Again, you take what data you have and you move forward. Be cautious about saying to parents, you know, well, we use a response intervention process, and so we can't move forward with the evaluation of your child until we have done these interventions for 6 or 12 weeks, or you know, think about it. 12 weeks is a very long period of time in a school year, so you have to be cautious. Did I get it, Dina?
You did, actually. That was exactly what I was going to say, is just making sure that all of these are individualized, and just because someone is referred for an evaluation does not necessarily mean they're going to qualify. And I think having those conversations with the parents, even, you know, even if we do have a parent request, of course, we have, we've asked our directors and our special educators to, you know, to definitely take those into account and to have those discussions with parents immediately. And as you said, Frank, you know, IDEA does make sure that we do not extend or, you know, wait too long. However, we do need to have that data before us so that we can make that comprehensive evaluation effective. So thank you for that.
Okay. Yep. So just be aware of those arbitrary timelines, because that can really trip you up. So just moving on, you know, we talked about the idea of eligibility and determining that a child needs specially designed instruction, which is instruction that's adapted as appropriate to the needs of the child, and you know, adaptations in the content, the methodology, and the delivery of instruction, right? That's the definition of it. So just in the sense of time, you understand that once we determine they're eligible, an IEP is developed. That IEP is reviewed annually. It's implemented as it's developed. It's reviewed annually. And every 3 years, there's a requirement that if, unless the parent and the district agree otherwise, the child will be reevaluated to determine if they continue to be a child with disability or to determine their educational needs. And so it's a loop. It's a process that repeats until it comes time for them to exit from services. So if a child has met all their goals and they don't need additional goals, their learning has essentially caught up, they can exit. And they can move out. And so you have to be cautious about those situations where the child should be out working on their own, but we're hesitant to take them out of the protections of special education. You need to give them the ability to go and do and be proud of what they've accomplished, because if they begin to falter and fumble again, they can come back in. Once they exit, it doesn't mean forever. It means for right now. It may be forever, but it may be that things change when they move from middle school to high school or whatever. So teams need to be really focused on the needs of the child, not the concerns of the team and the parent. And I know that's hard. I'm a parent of kids with disabilities. I've been in those meetings. I've had those conversations. I know that it's hard to say, nope, they're ready to do it on their own. But when they are, it's the best thing for the child. Okay? Keeping them in services that they don't need is not appropriate. So the role of various staff members, we talked a little bit, Kimberly talked about the role of paraeducators, Greg talked a little bit about the role of paraeducators, but let's talk about the team in general. So the role of the special education teacher, and this is something that's interesting and sometimes throws special educators for a loop. When you're working a special education teacher and a paraeducator team, often the teacher gets put into a leadership and supervisory role. So that's something that you need to, as a teacher, you need to be sure that you're prepared for. Do you know what it takes to direct staff? Not that you're in a higher fire position, but you need to be able to direct their work on a day-to-day basis. Are you ready to do that? Do you have the understanding of how to effectively work with someone and direct their work? You need to assure that students are moving towards achievement of their goals. This is the progress monitoring piece of the IEP process. You need to make sure that you're collecting data throughout the year, that you're looking at that data and making a determination. And if you see a pattern that says they're not progressing towards their goal, you need to bring it up and address it. This is also true for paraeducators. As you're working with kids, if you see that something doesn't seem to be working because you're the one who's providing the repeated practice or the support and having more interaction, then you need to be communicating that with the teacher and making sure they're aware. It causes a large liability for the district if the team has identified that children are not making progress and they're not addressing it. So you need to be sure. So again, planning and implementing the instructional objectives, communicating those things through the other team members. Prepare and collaborate with the paraeducator as to the specifics of the instruction. Monitor, supervise, and evaluate paraeducators assigned to the students. And evaluate not only, and I don't mean this in the sense of job performance, although that may be part of it, but evaluate the interaction between the paraeducator and the student. Make sure that it's an effective relationship. I have seen a number of cases where there was a paraeducator and a student who absolutely could not work with each other. They couldn't communicate. There was some factor that was involved that wasn't identified, but the learning of the student was significantly impacted. Okay, so you need to make sure that you're keeping track of that, that you're not just saying, okay, go work with this group of kids and off they go. So I see the people commenting about communication and the issue and the importance of it again here. Again, the issue of who communicates with the parent we'll talk about a little bit, but it shouldn't be the paraprofessional. You should be communicating with the teacher, and the teacher should be communicating with the parent, right? So you guys are right in that you're not communicating directly with parents. And one of the issues that Greg was talking about in terms of confidentiality that can cause problems is because you're the para who works with the student and you run into the family in the grocery store, the parent may ask you questions. They might want to know, how's my child doing? You need to be thinking about how you're going to deal with that, because that's not your stuff. That's not your stuff to be answering. You can say, I enjoy working with your child. And if you have questions specific to how they're performing, you need to ask their teacher. But you need to be aware of that. It's part confidentiality, it's part professionalism. You need to be sure that you're not taking on more than what you should there. So the role of the general education teacher in this process is important. It's critical. Especially regular education teachers need to be participating in the process, be participating in the intervention process, be an active participant in the evaluation and development of the IEP. The general educator is the only person who can provide the information that's needed to determine what are appropriate or needed accommodations or modifications in the classroom, right? They're the ones that know that. And so kids don't get accommodations because they have a specific disability. So you'll often hear that said, and it's a great concern. Oh, our kids with learning disabilities, they all get extended time, they get tests read to them, those things need to be specific to the needs of the child, not the needs of the program. And so it's important that the general educators are participating and providing input into what will be effective and help the child in their classroom setting. So, you need to general education teachers also are providing the direct instruction to the children. And you know, that's that tier 1 learning for all kids, right? So implementing discipline, participating as a team member, implementing behavior intervention plans as they're developed. The other piece that I want to talk about here, and I didn't put a slide here, but I know we've got a number of administrators on here, and the keys for the administrators here are that the role of the administrator in the building or district level is to provide what's called general supervision, to oversee the special education program, to make sure that it's effective and operating within the regulations. And so to do that, it's important for administrators to understand special education, to understand the requirements, to understand the law, know who to talk to get questions answered. Your staff at the WDE, I've worked with on a number of different occasions, including in my role as the special ed director in Montana, and they're terrific. They are a highly skilled group of people that have been gathered together, and they are there to help you, and they will answer questions for you. And if you have questions, you should ask them. The administrator needs to be supporting the staff to providing resources that are needed for them to be able to do the work that they need to do, to make sure that they are getting the training that's needed. This is important for teachers and paraeducators and other staff members, to make sure that they understand what they're doing. If you have a behavior intervention plan for a student, in order for it to be effective, it has to be implemented by everybody who has contact with the student. If you have a behavior plan, you need to make sure that the bus driver who brings the kid to school and takes them home understands what that plan is and understands how to respond if the problem behaviors are showing up on the bus. They need training for that. They're not paraeducators, they're bus drivers, but they need training. Okay. And you need to, as administrators, be sure you're participating in the process, attending evaluation meetings, attending IEP meetings, making sure that you're there, that you are aware of the kids that are going on. I'm not all the administrators here. I know that you are effectively supporting your staffs. I just want you to remember that it's a complex process, and I know that you're running an entire school, and that 10% of your kids will be children with disabilities, but they're going to take up 50% of your time, right? So it's important that that you that you are committed to that process. The role of the paraeducator, again, this is a long list. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this because we're running out here, but Kimberly did a great job this morning, carrying out instructional programs. She described most of this stuff: assisting students performing, reinforcing learning, assisting the teacher in charting behavior, those kinds of things. Participate in building level duties as assigned. So sometimes as a paraeducator, your day is split up and you're doing multiple things, those clerical kinds of things, typing and filing and assisting. All of that is helping improve the education of all the kids, because it's taking and increasing the amount of time the teacher has to do effective instruction. Right. So it's important. Sometimes it may seem mundane, and I understand that, but it's an important critical function. Learning how to use adaptive equipment to help support students that need it. Collaborating with the team and providing information, attending meetings when you're asked to, assisting with mobility and self-care needs. Right. So it's important, and this has kind of been mentioned as well, paraeducators can be left alone for short periods of time, but the law requires that paraeducators be operating under the direct supervision of the special education teacher. And so that may be a collaborative role where you're working with the regular education teacher in the classroom to support instruction, but that's because that's what's been designed by the IEP team. right? So you're not just assigned to go do things, but you're given direction, and you're supporting instruction and not providing the initial instruction. You know, be involved in planning for students and support integration of students with disabilities into general ed programs, right? You don't independently teach new concepts. You don't assume primary responsibility for working with students, right? You don't substitute in the IEP meeting for the special education teacher, right? So all of that. So it's a big role, and you know, it's a critical role, and I really appreciated the conversation this morning where you're talking about you're not just a paraeducator. There is no such thing as just a paraeducator, and I admire you all. So again, just to wrap up here, what Greg was talking about, communication is key. One of the things I want to talk to you about here is there's a website that I think that would be interesting for you to review. It's called Disability is Natural, and it's disabilityisnatural.com. It's all one word. And Kathy Snow is someone who has done a lot of writing and thinking about this idea about what's called people first language. And when we talk about professionalism and ethics and those sort of things, we talk about the idea of how you communicate around, about, and to people with disabilities. And you know, it's about not using terms like that autistic child, or not talking about the LD classroom, or right. People have disabilities. They're not defined by their disabilities. Thanks, Kimberly, for putting that up there. Kimberly put a link in the chat for that page. A person has a disability or a medical diagnosis. We don't refer to, you know, your brother with diabetes as the diabetic in the family, right? They're your brother. It's the same with kids. They're not the disability. They're not the OHI kid. They're not the ED kid. They're a child. They have a name. Try to and take the disability part of it out of your communication. So, you know, they don't suffer from something. They have a disability, and that's it. And that's as far as it needs to go. And so this page has a lot of great information. We in the past have she wrote a great little booklet on people first language, and you can actually find a link to the similar document on this website. But we used to give that document out. Anyway, so just be sure that the whole point about communication, as Greg was saying, is it's about talking to each other. It's about establishing the covenants for your team about how you're going to communicate with each other, how to talk safely, how to understand how to approach someone when you have a conflict or an issue, and talking about that. So we have to make sure that all team members have the ability to share the information, right? We need to check for understanding. We need to be sure. So the reason I gave you that acronym booklet is because of this. We need to make sure that this educational jargon that we use, right? I'm sure that I have spoken the phrase, yeah, we're having an IEP meeting to look at the FUBA and address a new BIP for this kid, right? We're having a meeting for their individual education program to review a functional behavior assessment and develop a behavior intervention plan. Right. Not only do we completely baffle parents, but a lot of times folks within our system don't understand. And Kimberly mentioned this. I was in a school not too long ago, and they were using an acronym for a testing system that they were using. I had no idea what they were talking about. I've been in this for 27 years. I've worked at a state agency. I invented acronyms. It was part of our job. We came up with them. I had no idea. So it's important to make sure that everybody understands that when you say, I need you to go do this, that they understand completely what it is they're being asked to do. Confidentiality, we're not going to spend any time on. So, because Greg did a great job with that. So again, paraeducators play a critical role here. You support teachers, support staff, students, and good communication is important. I hope that you've been putting questions. I appreciate everybody sharing their thoughts in the chat as we've went along. This next session that's coming up is going to be a great opportunity for question and answers and to get some of the things clarified that you have. So we're not going to spend time on that because we're over. I just want to remind you, this is a saying that we have at TACE, and we say this all the time: keep the main thing the main thing. We're here to educate children with disabilities and to make sure that they get everything that they need. Make sure that we keep that as our focus. Thanks, everybody.
Wonderful, Frank. Great stuff. So much stuff. And we feel bad. We knew that when we were putting this together that it would be a lot of stuff to deliver to you all. And but I really appreciate, and I see in the comments that that's reflected as well. Kimberly and Greg and Frank putting together this content in a way that I feel like was usable and digestible. And so let's take just a minute now and we'll transition to the Q&A panel, and I will invite, I see we got Dina, we got Greg here. Let's keep Frank with us. So we'll just take another minute and transition. If you need to take a quick break, go ahead and do that. And we'll come back and we'll have the panel with their videos on and with their mute button ready to unmute. And what we will do is we've got plenty of questions here, I think, that'll take up our remaining time with you. And there are some really great questions, some that will be answerable, some that will have the preface, it depends kind of thing, but that's okay. Let's have a great discussion here. So we'll start here in about 2 minutes, allow folks to take a quick break, come back, and we'll have the panel ready to go, and we'll start asking questions. All right, we are in session 4 Q&A panel discussion, and we've invited our presenters to stay along with us and be ready to respond to some of these, as well as your leadership from Wyoming Department of Education. And again, we're just grateful to have them here and be part of this process. And most importantly, super impressed and grateful that you all are here with us participating. We've had a really nice group of people here. I haven't seen anybody really, the participant number has stayed very steady, which has been really great. So let's jump right into this. I'm just going to, and our panel members haven't necessarily seen these questions because they came in live throughout the morning and we just got them collected. So they're going to be brave, and I'll just ask some questions, and then what we'll do is just invite any member of the panel to unmute and share their thoughts. And I'll try to moderate and make sure that we are able to kind of stay on track, because I know with me as a panel member, if I'm on the panel, which I'm not, thankful would be, but I'm the moderator, which sometimes might be worse, is I talk too much and I get off track. So I'm going to try to keep us on track. Margie, if I don't, then you're in charge, okay? You keep us on track. All right, how about this first question? Yeah, somebody did ask about the PowerPoints and the other materials. We will absolutely combine all of these resources, tools, and PowerPoints and different things that you've seen into one combined resource document, and those will be emailed out to everybody. So I know that was a lot of the questions in there. So there's that. All right, here's a great question, and this reflects back to both Kimberly and Greg's presentations and some of the thoughts that they shared around shared expectations. And the question was, I would like to know how to positively bring shared expectations to my school district and my team of paras. I feel like our school district, including our case managers, feel like we are, quote, just paras, and I want to help change that. What a great question. So what are some strategies that the panel can think of that might empower us as paras and other members of the instructional team to change that perception of, that just paras, and how to improve on building a system of shared expectations and maybe better communication?
If I could weigh on that one, I would start by really asking the question in a way that invites the conversation. For example, you could say, it's obvious that nobody knows what they're doing around here. And, we need to kind of figure out what's going on here because this is really, you can take that kind of tack. The other tack is to take a more positive image, is to say, I really want to do my best within this team. And I want to bring my best. And in order to bring my best, it'd be helpful for me to, if I could understand what we have as expectations of each other. Now, I happen to believe that the conversation is a leadership function. And I believe that in this case, you as a para can serve as a leader by inviting the conversation. I'm wondering, would it be helpful if we took a little bit of time just to clarify what questions we have, what assumptions we have, what expectations we have, in order to really work together effectively. So the question isn't, how do we solve the problem of how we're being so dysfunctional? The question is, how do we create an image as to who we want to be as a group? And I think anybody can ask that question. In my experience, people respond with, that's a great question. Let's have that conversation. So that would be one take I would put on it.
Thanks, Greg. Any other panel members have any thoughts on that?
I would just support what Greg said about it starts with the conversation. And I think about when Dina was a special education teacher at the building in which I happened to be the principal a few years back. And as a special ed teacher, she came to me and said, hey, I'd like to have time in the schedule to have weekly conversations with my paraprofessionals around expectations and how we can better support students. But that conversation could also have happened with a para coming to me as a building principal saying, hey, is it possible that we could have some time in our schedule that we could collaborate as paras and special ed, as a special ed team, to talk about expectations and to improve outcomes for students together? And so I think it starts with that conversation. And it could be, instead of, can we develop some expectations? The conversation could be, could we have time weekly to collaborate around student needs? And then that would naturally happen in those discussions. Let's talk about expectations. What is my role as a para? What is the role of the teacher? How do we work together? When a parent comes to me and demands information, do you want me to answer that question, or do you want the teacher to answer those questions? So we could, I think some collaboration time would be great. That just really, I think going to your leadership in your building and asking for that opportunity to have collaborative time might be a first step.
Wonderful.
I will add just one thing, Norm, is that I teach a one-day class on this particular topic, and I have a little bit of a manual. I will send the material to Brenda, and you can just have it as something you might want to say, hey, I was at this conference, I picked this up. You might want to take a look at it. So I will send that material along as a way to maybe even introduce the conversation. So
excellent. Yeah, thanks, Greg. We'll share that out.
I was going to add one more thing, if you don't mind. So
yeah.
That self-reflection tool for paraeducators, that's another option too. It's a way to break the ice, and you could take it to your partner teacher and say, hey, I attended this conference and I received this tool, and I was wondering if maybe you could help me with this, so that we both can, so that I get a better understanding, of what this means in the classroom, or what these areas mean in the classroom. Then you as a paraeducator are handing over the power to the partner teacher. And that's a good thing, because there are power struggles. We know that. And that's a way for you to show that it's not about power. It's about collaboration and partnering. And that's just a tool that you can use that opens the door a little, and then you just keep opening it more and more as you move forward.
Love it. Great suggestions, great strategies. So seeking, collaboration time in communication, and Kimberly's suggestion now of using that tool, but approaching it in a way that is collaborative and not threatening in any way to any other member of the instructional team. Love that. Other thoughts from anybody?
I just want to piggyback on what Margie had brought up about that time. I'm a big proponent of PLC time, or that professional learning community time. And that was, some of those things came up when I realized that we didn't necessarily need to have it with our whole team, but as special education teachers and our partners with our paraeducators, we needed some time to go through some of those things that happened. And we did it weekly, but sometimes it ended up being a little break in the day for daily, but we at least set aside time in our schedule for a weekly PLC with our paras. And I can tell you, at least from my perspective as a teacher, and I believe one of the paras who I worked with is on today, and so hopefully she could attest to this too, that it made a big difference in just knowing what is going on with our kiddos, because many times, as it's been stated in this training today, many times our paraeducators are with our students a lot more than even the gen ed teacher or the special educator. And so on a one-on-one basis, I should say, not, and that teacher should be following up, but it's definitely imperative that you have those conversations.
Wonderful. Thanks, Dina.
My name is Leanne Friedrichs, and I live in Laramie, Wyoming, and I've been a paraeducator for 17 years, and I did work with Dina. And so it is very important to have those conversations with your paras to see what is going on with those kids. You're going into all these other classes and trying to bet. And I've always been really good about going back to the teacher and saying, okay, this is going on. This is what is happening. What would you like for me to do about that? And how to handle different things, different situations. And it's awesome when your teacher, of record, helps you out with all that and encourages that and talks with other teachers and keeps that line of communication going.
Yeah, great, Leanne. Yeah, thank you for that. So working to, take away from what I heard you say is through communication is, building relationships and looking for ways that you can connect with your teacher partner and relate to them and build that relationship of trust. Okay, let's try this question, team. How about this one? This is kind of an important one, and I think it's frequent, and I think I saw some related questions in the chat about this, and that is, as a paraeducator, oftentimes we are not told much of anything about the student, particularly their internal or external factors that were talked about earlier in those students, because they tell us, we're told that it's confidential and that we don't need to know. And this is particularly troublesome when it's a student that we actually work with. So what are some strategies there? What would the panel suggest to the paraeducator who was told that regarding a student that they work with, that they don't need to know a particular aspect of a child, of their internal or external factors, because those things are confidential? Thoughts on that question?
So I'll weigh in because I think that the previous conversation is actually part of the answer to this. That regular communication about the things that you're seeing and the the particular issues that you're encountering with the child, with the team or with your teacher, and getting the support. FERPA is pretty specific about need to know, but I think that you can address some things separately. So the paraeducator might not need to know that the child was sexually abused by their uncle, but they will need to know that the child is emotionally very reactive to males, or that that there are certain behaviors of you that might be a trigger for that child. So it's different. It's about defining. I'm not sure if it was Kimberly or Greg that talked about need to know versus wanting to know, or wanting to yep, we want to know that stuff, but we don't really need to in order to address. We need to know what to anticipate and how to address that, and that comes through that communication process. So
I would also just piggyback on what Frank just said. And there are some things, though, that the paras will need to know if it's a safety issue. If it is an uncle like that, then obviously that uncle probably has some orders that he cannot pick that child up. And so, that, because a lot of times our paras are the ones who are doing, putting kids on buses or seeing who's picking up children. And so I would just piggyback on that, if it is an issue, just at least letting know, they don't need to know all the details, as Frank said. However, if it is a safety issue, they do need to know that, this named person cannot pick up that child.
Dina, this is Gail. My camera is disabled, but I just wanted to add to that also health concerns. Paras need to be aware of any health concerns if a student has a seizure disorder and trained as to how to respond if they find themselves in that position.
Yeah, thanks, Gail. Very important point as well. Other comments from the panel?
I would just add, it's a negotiation. I need to know this information. Do I know why I need to know this information? Do I have a rationale? Do I share that rationale? And I think, Frank reiterated it. Do I need to know? Do I want to know? Yeah, I kind of want to know. Do I need to? I don't know. If I need to, why? So all I'm saying is that part of our our effectiveness as a team is our ability to navigate those kind of challenging conversations. And there are times in my role as a paraeducator where I'm going to acquiesce to the authority of my supervisor who makes a decision that I may not agree with. And yet as a member of a team, I'm going to go forward and continue to do the best work I can within that context.
Excellent. Okay, great question, great thoughts. Here's another question. Paras are not invited to staff meetings oftentimes, or other meetings when teachers meet, where they discuss things that are that they are going to do in their lesson plans. How do we get involved if we feel we are not wanted there or told not to attend unless we do on our own time? And again, pay is oftentimes a limitation. So paras have a shorter work day and they're limited in their ability to participate in, what would be viewed as important conversations, and often aren't invited because of various reasons, their contract day being one of them. What are some thoughts about how this question could be responded to in terms of how could the paraeducator find ways to understand those discussions and be part of that conversation when teachers go about their meetings and discuss things around lesson plans? How do parents, or how can paras become involved and be better informed in those kinds of situations?
Norm, I'm going to jump in on this one.
Yeah.
I'm going to go back to that PLC that I mentioned before with that, because I truly do believe it should be a partnership between the teacher and the para. And if paras are either not able to go, I know a lot of times that was the issue, our staff meetings would be held after school many times. And that's when our paras would be on bus duty, or maybe they had a second job trying to make ends meet, or, again, it was out of their contract time, so maybe they didn't stay. I know a lot of times any principal that I've worked with, they would invite them to come if they would like to be a part. However, that wasn't always feasible. So in my opinion, I feel like that should fall back on that partnership between the special education teacher to relay that message to them, and to have that conversation. If those things aren't happening as a para. I know when I was a para back in the day, I would just go ask my teachers, hey, can you fill me in on what happened, or is there anything I need to know? That happened in those meetings. And so for that to be a two-way street, for the teachers to share the information, but also those paras be willing to ask.
I would add to that, Dina, I think you're 100% right on the mark there, but I would add the small piece of the para should be going to the teacher and saying, here's what I know that I think you need to know before you go have this discussion, because it is a two-way street. So I think that you shouldn't, as a para, you should be be sure you're communicating with the teacher about what you're seeing and as well, so that they can effectively participate in those discussions with the other teachers. And then they can come back and say, okay, here's what I learned that you need to know. So it's that two-way street. You're absolutely right.
Great, thank you. Other comments on this question from the panel? Okay, let's move on to the next question. Kind of related, a little different flavor. What do you do if you're not treated as part of the instructional team? For example, if I have a comment or concern that does not get taken seriously and is dismissed, again, kind of going back to that, I'm just a para perception. We do find that lack of communication is huge. And so what are some strategies there? And I think a lot of the comments that have been made so far relate to this, but other thoughts on strategies for paras to use when they feel like that's the environment that they're in? I think one of the things that I've kind of been hearing as a theme is that as paraeducators, you all should feel empowered. You're a critical member of the instructional team, and so feel empowered to go and ask questions and to ask for conversations. Other thoughts from the panel on this? Yeah.
I think one of the things Greg said earlier is to begin the conversations by saying, I want to do the best that I can. In order for me to do the best that I can, I need to know, this or that or whatever, and not start the conversation as a accusation. You always leave me out. You never let me start, I'm supposed to operate in the blind. But really just invite it and say, look, I'm working hard to do the best that I can, and here's what I need, and just identify it.
I agree. And I think I was just reminded from a para that I was privileged to work with, that she just reminded me that our principal in the building would actually spend an hour sometime during the day with the para, or at least however long they could, to fill them in on what happened in the staff meeting. So it may not be, if you don't have that great relationship with your teacher, I would go to your administrator and ask them to provide that information for you, because it doesn't always, in a perfect world, we all get along, right? We play well in the sandbox, but it doesn't always happen that way. And so I think, just having that administrator also be a part of that piece is important.
Yeah, that's great, Dina. I'm thinking about my wife, who also was a paraeducator for many years, and she's not one to be quiet, and she's had very great success using many of these strategies. And she'll go right into the principal's office and just say, here's what I think. Let's talk for a few minutes. And you know what? Our administrators are very busy. Teachers are very busy. You all as paraeducators are very busy. And sometimes it's not intentional that information does not get shared out. It's not intentional. It's just because of the nature of the job. So there again, feel empowered and go and talk to folks. Okay, here's another question. And it's related to access to the IEP. So the question is, may I participate on the IEP team? And then related to that is, can I look at the IEP document or get a copy of it? Great question. Who wants to say it depends first? Okay, panel, be brave.
Okay, here's what I'm going to say. The IDEA regulations require that the school district make every person who has a responsibility for implementing an IEP aware of what their responsibility is. So the district has an affirmative responsibility to make sure that you know what you need to know. So if there's a need for you to have information about the entire IEP, then the district is responsible for making sure that. But oftentimes what you need is, you need to know what the specific goals are, You need, we're working on reading, and here's where they're at right now, and here's where we want them to be. You need to know, if you're working in a classroom, what the identified accommodations and modifications are for a child so that you can implement those. But you don't necessarily need to review the entire IEP, because the other parts of it are going to be meaningless to you. They're not going to improve your work with the child at all. So that's my version of other than it depends.
Great, thank you. I think that was a perfect answer, and it really does. And somebody actually put in the chat that they get a IEP at a glance, and I've seen those and I've done those before too. And I think that that is a perfect way to also get that information out there without having an IEP floating around, because those are federal documents, and they have a lot of confidential things in those. And if I can, I'm just going to tie in. There's a couple of questions that came around that way back in the chat, and I wrote them down, and I think it applies right here. So if you don't mind, Norm, I'm going to just throw this one out there.
Please do.
This one had to do with about note taking for, para's documentation and making sure that it's valid and relevant and actionable. And then there was also a piece about communication journals going home. And the only thing I would say is, I know when I was a para, we were cautioned to make sure that we do document, valid information, that we stick to data, and that we be really careful not putting opinions in, because it can be very subjective that way. We need to make sure that we're sticking to really that pertinent information. If there's something that says Johnny had a good day, or something like that, but if you're getting into putting information in there, I would definitely be cautious about sending home those types of things, and I would stick to data. And then also just those, that documentation is valid and relevant and actionable is very true. I think we need to make sure that, again, we're staying out of that subjective lane.
Thank you, Dina. Thoughts from others on the panel? Okay.
I guess I would just add, I think, Dina, I really appreciate what you said. There's a significant distinction between the facts and my interpretation of the facts. And I think that when we're sharing information, we need to be really clear. It's like, what am I sharing that's factual data? And what am I sharing that happens to be my interpretation? And again, when you get into that interpretation that you're beginning to treat as a fact, that it becomes problematic. So.
This is Gail. I would agree with that. And that doesn't just go for paras, right? That's for everybody, all adults. And
Absolutely.
I think we don't provide enough training and support around that. And it's so important. And the other thing that I was thinking about this morning is really training and supporting people to deal with behavior, not to get into power struggles. Like someone mentioned earlier, to know and understand certain triggers for kids and be able to identify them. And yeah, all those things that are, sometimes I think they don't really teach you in school, right? You get into the classroom and it's on the job training, but super important.
Yeah,
Well,
great
even
point.
after COVID, I feel students need more social emotional support. And it's harder to find it for the junior high school as opposed to some of the youngers.
Yeah, great point, Cami. Yeah, so there again, just communicating and kind of rallying the team together and talking, right, as an instructional team, and asking the team those questions. What's out there? What can we do? How can we kind of come together?
We do, it's an ICC meeting, so it's like an interagency coordinating council.
where we all kind of share ideas or tips, and it's all confidential, but just ensuring we all know what's out there for families and how it's changed. And really, there's a ton more support since COVID.
Yeah, it's an issue right now. That's good. That's a good point. Okay. How about this question? It's kind of related to some of the conversation that's been having that we've had already. But what about this one? What if I find myself in a position where I'm uncomfortable doing something that the teacher or the other members of the instructional team see as a duty that the paraeducator should be doing? Somebody put in the chat just a couple minutes ago, things like, going and making copies and, kind of running errands, that kind of thing. But also there's other things like toileting. This was the question that was submitted is, some of our students with special needs require, as part of their IEP, certain kinds of supports, whether it's hygiene related or, behavior intervention related, that maybe a member of the team, for example, the paraeducator, isn't simply personally or even maybe professionally comfortable in carrying out. So what would the panel advise the para to do in those kinds of situations?
Well, I would say that, we've talked a lot about open communication, and I would start with that. And I would suggest that the parent talk to the partner teacher or whoever, is next in line, and just be honest. I mean, to say, I'm not comfortable with that. That's not the same as saying, I'm not willing to do it. And I think that there can be a conversation where, so tell me what you're feeling. Do you need training in this area? Or, is that maybe some kind of a emotional trigger for you? Or do you have fears around, possible accusations? It could be any number of things, but I think I would just say, be honest and go into it with an openness and willingness to find a solution. It may be that those tasks can be assigned to someone else, but it may be that they can't. And so I think working together is probably the best approach to take.
Yeah, thanks, Gail. Other thoughts from the team?
I guess I would just echo this, and this is maybe from my experience, talking to my wife. You gave a whole range there, making copies. Fine, I'll make copies. If you want me to make copies, I'll make copies. I don't care. They need to be made. They need to be made. So it's like, part of me goes like, we're a team working collectively to get those things done. Okay. I think that, and I think Gail, you really addressed this. I was thinking of an example. I mean, for my wife working in special ed preschool, toileting is what you do. It's like it's a big part of what you got to do with kids. That's it. But then there was a shift. I remember when she was working with a student who had a feeding tube, and that pushed her into a context where she just had some, I think legitimate fears. What if I get this wrong? And I think that for Gail's, I just want to reiterate Gail's comment that, to be really honest with this, it's not that I don't want to do this. I'm not sure I know how to do this. I'm really concerned I'm going to get this wrong. What does that mean? So I just want to reinforce that I think there's a continuum of things we get asked to do. And again, that open communication and building that trust is important. So
I think that starts to, Greg, with districts being open when they hire staff about what that scope is. I think that people are hired saying, well, based on the current job, you're going to be in a resource room helping kids learn to read. But the fact is, that kid moves into the district, guess what? Your role changes. And I think that we aren't always, as hiring folks, as honest as we might be, or as open as we might be about what the entire scope of things could be.
Great points, good thoughts. Anybody else want to weigh in there? Okay, yeah. All right, let's see, got a couple more questions here. We're doing well on time. Here's an interesting question. I'd like the panel to comment on how cultural perspectives and bias implicate our work in a couple ways. One of them is our perceptions of the student, and then our interactions with parents and caregivers. And so it's that issue, that question that's right now, it's an important conversation about what do we as a professional employee in a public school system working with students and their parents and others in the members of the team, what do we bring to what biases or cultural misunderstandings or lack of understandings that do we bring to the work that we might need to be careful of or be aware of, and how do we go about making sure that we are able to avoid those kinds of biases and cultural perspectives? That's a great question.
So can I jump in first? So this is the reason that I pointed you to the Disability is Natural, that website, and the People First language. It is more basic than even a cultural bias here. And I just want to point out that oftentimes the most significant bias that kids are exposed to in the school is because we say that ED kid. Because as soon as we say that ED kid, everyone's mind has a picture of what we expect from them. We're no longer looking at them as an individual. We're anticipating the kinds of problems we're going to have with them. And that is that implicit bias that is there for people with disabilities across the board. You add on the layers of culture and regional expectations and everything. Just the para is an example of that. It's how you as a staff member are experiencing that yourself. Because if people see you as just a para, they treat you differently. You're not a whole member of the team. You're a part member. And so I think that a lot of the stuff that's talked about in that People First language, that disability language, can actually be helpful in addressing some of those other issues.
Yeah, thanks, Frank. Other thoughts? This kind of goes back to a little bit, I think, to Kimberly's discussion about considering the whole child. And we come from our perspective. We wake up in the morning, we go to our workplace, which is their classroom or the school building, and we have our experiences, whether it's because of our socioeconomic status, our language that we know how to speak, our cultural circumstances, and we sometimes do view kids and we kind of get judgy, and we might say to ourselves, well, why is that kid wearing the same shirt 3 days in a row now? It's kind of smelly. Or can't this child, who we know comes from a more affluent family, behave better? And that's just sort of a natural thing that we all do, I think, generally speaking, but just being aware of that, it seems to me would be one of the first tasks, and then working on that. And it's like anything, you have to kind of practice it. You think those thoughts, and then you tell yourself, well, I just told that teacher that, that ED kid, or that Black kid, or that Hispanic kid, or that white kid, whatever it might be. And what does that suggest? What message is that sending, not only to the external folks, but what am I reinforcing in myself internally about these kinds of biases?
This is Robin from Lovell, Wyoming. I just had a thought, if it's all right. My sister had the opportunity to teach in a reservation school for about 30 years. And she embraced their culture. She found out about it. She learned some words. She talked with the elders. She, and it turned out, of course, that she had children, and then they had children, and she had their kids in her class and that kind of thing. But, and so, that's something that we can all, do as well. I had a student who was so excited about having a quinceañera, and I didn't really know what that was, but it was an opportunity for me to find out and those kinds of things. So from that kind of cultural perspective, we can do those kinds of things.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, great suggestion, Robin. Thanks for sharing.
So if I could just add to that, I think, Norm, I think the important question isn't, what do I do if this happens? The question is when it happens. Because the point is that, we are constantly taking in data and then we're making meaning out of that data. And that's what we're doing, okay? And I don't know about in Wyoming, but I noticed, in Washington, there's a significant, I was in one of our larger school districts, and I was walking up the stairwell and there were posters for various events that the school district was hosting. And, one was, sessions on mindfulness. Mindfulness, whatever you think about mindfulness is the ability to develop self-awareness. And part of that self-awareness is, what am I making this mean? What's the narrative that I'm telling myself about this family, or about this child who's wearing this shirt for the, third or fourth day? And the important question that comes after that is, what else could it mean? And I think that, I deal with, people, of course, in the context of conflict, and I say, if you really want to get better and more effective at doing this work, is really increase your capacity for curiosity. What's going on here? And I think that in the context that, Norm, you identified there, that's become it's become popularized is, we've moved from the notion of cultural competence to cultural humility. What do I need to understand that I don't understand? And how are we going to work together to learn that? So I think that as a practice, it's really developing a commitment to self-awareness and owning that you are making meaning of things all the time. And it's not about stopping doing that. It's recognizing I'm doing it, and it's not always helpful. And so being open to, what else could be going on here that I need to be aware of.
Greg, Greg, I love that. What does this mean? It's funny, I was listening to Tony Robbins this morning, and he specifically said, what does this mean? Another thing that one can use is cognitive reframing, and not, looking when you're in the middle of a situation, whether that's with a student or another colleague, and reframing the way you are thinking about the situation, or maybe if you're judging someone or something, making sure that you bring it back and reframe the way you're looking at it, or the way you're thinking about it. I've had to learn to do that. We all come from different walks of life, and the way we've been raised and our values and our morals most certainly impact the way we view situations and the way we view other individuals. But we have to step back and realize that just because we came from somewhere doesn't mean that that individual came from the same place. We have very different lived experiences. And Greg hit it on the head. What does that mean? And how can we reframe it differently in our minds to be able to view that child and accept them for the whole child that they are. That's who they are. And let's accept them for who they are, and accept our colleagues for who they are. But then let's learn what can we do to support them? What can we do to move forward? And recognizing our own biases. We all have them. It doesn't matter who we are. We all have our own biases, and accepting those and moving forward.
I had an instructor in a class I took in Canada years ago to give me a quote that hangs over my office. He says, the choice I have is to shift from judgment and fear to curiosity and compassion. And I just love that because I have a choice. I can look at this behavior, I can make judgments of it, I can feel threatened by that behavior. I can also step back and choose to be curious and compassionate and recognize I don't understand what's going on here. So
I think that Greg, one of the things you just said that's really important to remember is that it's a choice that we make, and we make it all the time. And it will become more automatic for you the more that you practice it. But as a human being, you are bombarded with so much information every day that if you don't make judgments based on past experience, you just can't survive. You have met people who can't filter, and we refer to them with lots of interesting names that come from a particular book. But the point is that it's a survival mechanism for you to be able to automatically judge someone based on very little information, because it's a safety thing to how to interact with them. So you do have to actively combat that. You do have to actively choose to reframe your thinking or to be curious. And you also have to give yourself some grace. And you have to say, when I make a judgment about somebody and it turns out to be wrong, okay, I learned from that and let's move on.
Oh, Dina, we're not hearing you. I'm so sorry. We're not hearing you. It looks like you are unmuted, but no.
Yeah, we may not have Dina. She let me know her head having a mic issue.
There's that hair clipper noise has come back, Dina. No. I'm so sorry. Frank, you need to put that quote, I think, in chat box. Several people are looking for you to
that was Greg's
that. Was that Greg? Yeah. Greg, if you could drop that in the chat box for people to remember. We are unfortunately out of time for our question and answers. We only had a couple more questions, but luckily they were related to much of the feedback and responses that were shared by the panel just now in response to other questions. So a wholehearted thank you for the presenters, for Dina, for Margie, for Gail, all of the panel members today, and for your questions. Very insightful, very important, very relevant questions. And with that, let me just quickly share a slide here to help us transition and be ready for tomorrow. So today, great content. Thank you so much for everybody being here. The time has gone by quickly. We want to give you the rest of your day now to rest up, because guess what? Tomorrow, you're not going to believe what's going to happen to you tomorrow. I hope you all come back. You need to get some rest. You need to get some sleep. You need to get a good breakfast in the morning, because tomorrow it's what I call the Katie and Christine show. And it really isn't a show. It's actually very professional content and wonderful information all about behavior. And so the 4 pieces tomorrow that you're going to receive are you're going to come away with information tomorrow that you're going to be able to take and use immediately when you get back into the school setting with your students or with your teachers. So understanding the functions of behavior, practical strategies for supporting behavior, considerations for crisis intervention, and then a session on tying things together as it relates to behavior. So again, get ready for tomorrow. It's going to be wonderful. It's going to be great. Thank you to our presenters and to Margie and her team. And with that, I'll turn it over to any final comments from anybody at WDE. I know, Dana, you probably did, but you.
Can I try?
Yes, you can try. We heard that.
Good. I just also want to echo what you said, Norm. Thank you so much to all of our presenters today, to Kimberly and Greg and Frank, and for all of you for participating today, because we learned from you as well as we move along. And so the only thing I was going to say at the end was it's all about relationships. And I hope that as we move forward, whether we're a para or a teacher, administrator, director, whatever our role, that we remember that, that all of these people are people, and that we need to, if we fall back on building relationships, it will all come together. So Thank you, Norm, for all of your team and your hard work as well. And I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks, Tina. Well said. And everybody enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Have a good evening, and we'll see you at 8:30 tomorrow morning Mountain Time.